Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always...
Before we get into today's explosive hearing, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the biggest moments from Washington. Today's exchange between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Representative Jayapal centered on one of the most controversial questions in America today. Where does free speech end, and where does the government's authority over immigration begin? Let's break down exactly what happened.
Claim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Representative Jayapal clashed during a tense congressional hearing over the revocation of a Turkish student's visa. Jayapal argued the action raised serious First Amendment concerns, while Rubio maintained that student visas are a privilege granted under U.S. immigration law and may be revoked under the Secretary of State's legal authority. This video breaks down the key arguments from both sides, explains the legal issues discussed during the hearing, and examines why the exchange has generated widespread attention. If you enjoy congressional hearing highlights, political analysis, and fact-based breakdowns, be sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.
And thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Öztürk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Öztürk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Öztürk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she'd engaged in any activities were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Öztürk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
But is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you, while I have the authority, I will continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear this country apart.
You said that, Mr. Secretary. Let me reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says. And that means that you are trumping the legal Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. that I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this
Secretary
country
Rubio,
apart.
I'm talking
Never
about
should have
this
allowed him in.
particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law
accurate?
student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her
visas every
student
day,
visa
and we will revoke
based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed. She wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
Reclaiming my time, you revoked her student visa because she wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest who's here to stir up trouble.
Are you going to revoke the visa of somebody who made that?
Send me the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
Actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You who granted that person to enter the United States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary Rubio,
deny them all the time, and we'll revoke them.
You revoked a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Graduate student Rubio Ozturk. Jayapal argued that the student had been targeted simply for co-authoring an opinion article and repeatedly asked Rubio whether revoking a visa because of speech conflicts with First Amendment protections. Rubio rejected that argument from the start. His central point was that there's no constitutional right to receive or keep a U.S. student visa. According to Rubio, visas are discretionary, and the State Department has legal authority under federal immigration law to deny or revoke them when officials determine it is appropriate. Throughout the exchange, Jayapal cited an internal State Department memo and a federal judge's decision, arguing there was no evidence that the student posed a national security threat beyond the published opinion piece. She questioned whether the administration was effectively punishing protected speech. Rubio maintained that Congress has granted the Secretary of State broad authority over visa decisions and said that authority would continue to be used when officials believe foreign nationals should no longer remain in the country under their visa status. The debate then shifted to the student's arrest. Jayapal criticized the use of masked federal agents, asking why such tactics were necessary against a graduate student. Rubio responded that the arrest itself was carried out by law enforcement agencies rather than the State Department. He added that officers sometimes conceal their identities because of security concerns and threats against federal agents. Another notable moment came when Jayapal presented what she viewed as an inconsistency. She asked whether someone who made anti-Semitic statements would also have their visa revoked, then referenced a refugee who had reportedly made similar comments. Rubio answered that refugee admissions and student visas involve different legal standards and separate immigration processes. He argued the comparison was not valid because the cases were handled under different sections of U.S. immigration law. The hearing ultimately highlighted two competing legal and policy perspectives. Supporters of Jayapal argue that the government should be extremely cautious when immigration decisions appear connected to political speech, warning that such actions could discourage free expression. Supporters of Rubio argue that foreign nationals do not have an automatic right to remain in the United States and that immigration law gives the executive branch broad discretion